There is a tremendous amount of influence regarding our attitudes and ideas about race, class, gender, and sexuality by media representation. When you think about how human beings have learned about the world around them, for almost all of our existence on this planet, we've learned about the world through listening to stories. Until the advent of the printing press, only 500 years ago, there was almost no books available to the average person. Radio is less than 100 years old, and television is about 60 years young. So my point here is that we learn through stories, and that language and storytelling has historically been one of the chief transmissions of culture. However, now stories are told through mass media much more often than human storytelling face-to-face. So the point here is that we hunger for stories. We learn about the world by listening to and seeing a story being told. But it's no longer a storyteller that we know, but rather someone who is directing, casting, producing, and funding the stories that influence us. So, who's telling us those stories? Most nightly TV news show hosts are men. Most key decision-making points in the media are controlled by men. Only 3% of key decision-makers are women. And the movies and television cater to men's or women's topics and themes. Men's shows depict fast cars, high-tech weapons, and explosions, while women's shows tend to emphasize communication, emotional bonding, intimate relationships, and motherhood. And the media historically has overrepresented men and boys in literature. The seminal study was done in 1970, and that was the Weitzman study of the Little Golden Books and Caldecott Award books. Weitzman found that boys were represented 11-1, that the boys were depicted in adventurous roles, and that when girls were part of the story, they were confined to the home. Now, while there's been some improvement in how often and how women and girls are depicted in the media, there still is not parity. So think in terms of the incredibly successful Harry Potter series. Still, there are far more males that are depicted than females. In the lead roles, there are 2 males and 1 female, and as far as the general ratio of males and females, there are more men than females, and men are in charge everywhere. Women hold secondary positions at best. And while in some non-sexist books, women may be portrayed with more masculine roles, it's very rare to see men portrayed with feminine traits. I think it's important, too, to consider the role that video games have in indoctrinating children to gender norms. Videos tend to be developed for male audiences, and when females are depicted, they tend to cater to male-centered desires by being scantily clad and voluptuous, with plenty of curves, large breasts, and long legs. Often females are portrayed as prostitutes or strippers. Rarely, if ever, are video games created that depict men as helpless or as objects for women. Women portrayed by the media will often be depicted in fulfilling a dual role, the perfect wife and mother, and also the successful career woman. The reality of life is that to be a parent and to maintain a successful career is a juggle of time, energy, and demands. The reality of the dual role is sometimes depicted, but the majority of the time, the problems that women face raising children and maintaining a career track are rarely depicted. The most likely image that is depicted is the seductive sex object. In Smith and Chady's 2010 study of 122 films, 1 in 4 females wore sexy or alluring clothing, where only 1 in 25 males wore these kinds of clothes. Portrayals of men in the media tends to be stereotypical too. The tough guy image is the most common, but we see images of the introspective and sensitive guy as well. So the contrast is Arnold Schwarzenegger versus Brad Pitt. The contrast here is pretty extreme and probably not very well tied to reality either. The majority of portrayals for men is the tough or the powerful male. Another stereotype, though, that has become popular in the past decade is the clueless male. And one of the first portrayals of that kind to be highly popular was Joey on Friends. The reason that it's so appealing is that it's so totally contrary to the conventional wisdom or stereotype of masculinity.